Welcome to this video where we are going to be going over using herbal plant medicine with animals and livestock, as well as talking about vaccines. And you may be surprised about how we approach vaccines when it comes to our animals, especially when we're talking with a certified herbalist and veterinarian from a holistic type background. I am very happy to have here on the farmstead today with me, Dr. Patrick Jones. You may know him from homegrownherbalist.net and also the founder of the School of Botanical Medicine. Dr. Jones, welcome to Norris Farmstead.
Happy to be here. Beautiful place.
Thank you.
This is a great place to be a cow. I'm just looking around and fantastic situation here.
It's kind of a great place to be a human too, but I think the cows may be more spoiled than I am.
Well, yeah.
Well, I'm very excited to pick your brain today. And so are they.
Yes.
They're very excited as well. But we're trying to do everything as holistically as possible. And I found, well, I can find information if I dig deep enough for human use. When it comes to holistically treating animals from people with clinical experience, that is much more difficult for me to find answers to.
Yeah. There aren't a ton of veterinary herbalists, and a lot of that is because we're trained like medical doctors are trained.
You have a spider.
Oh,
I got him.
We're trained like medical doctors are trained, and so they don't teach you anything about herbs in medical school or veterinary school.
Yeah.
And there's also concerns about mixing this with that, and I don't know what this does, but I know what that does. So that's why doctors don't like herbs sometimes, is because they want to know what they're doing. And
it's unknown to them. You're right, it's not
exactly. They have no training.
Right.
And so, it's a legitimate concern they have. But they can be used together, sometimes very effectively. But as far as herbs and animals, it's astonishing how similar it is.
Okay.
It really isn't that different. When we talk about things in the School of Botanical Medicine, we talk about systems, respiratory, reproductive, liver, whatever. And if there's something vastly different about a cow or a horse or a dog, I'll mention it. But mostly it's not any different,
So if it's antiviral for a human and a cow would have the same virus.
If your brother-in-law cuts his leg, you put comfrey on it. If your cow cuts her leg, you put comfrey on it. Antibiotic herbs, pain herbs, it's very similar. Dosing's a little different. As you might imagine.
They're a little larger.
But it's interesting. It's actually not as different as you'd expect. A cow this size, I'd probably, if I was using a dry powder, I'd probably use a couple of tablespoons.
That'd be it?
That's it.
Really?
Yeah. And it's interesting. I find with animals, I have to use a lot less herb per pound than I do with dogs and humans.
Interesting.
And I think it's because they're still eating what they're supposed to eat.
Yeah, and it's definitely these guys. They're grass fed.
Yeah. So I think they're living a lot closer to the way God intended them to and designed them to do, and so they're maybe there's less junk food to overcome or something. But a couple of tablespoons of powder is great.
That's fascinating.
And I would use the same plants, for whatever you're doing.
Okay, so I've been waiting. I've been waiting for you to come to do this video. So I have a couple of things that I want to talk to. And so first is, because they all have just dropped calves. We have a few more coming. Don't you get sassy with them horns. So we've got a couple of bulls.
Right.
Bull calves. And normally, prior to having cattle with horns, we would just go grab them when they were a few days old and we would band them to castrate.
Sure.
To castrate them. With these guys, however, they win.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm not grabbing their baby at this point until we've had some more time to establish our friendship. So we're looking at doing knife castration. And so we got a chute, so we're able to put them in the chute and keep mom and everybody, safe and stable and all those fun things. But I have never done knife castration before, and we've never castrated the calves past being like 3 days old, because at that point they're real hard to catch. They're pretty fast. So I was looking online and tetanus, and it was saying that if you band when they're older, which we're planning on doing knife cutting, but there's less of a chance of tetanus issues with knife cut. But if you band when they're older, that tetanus can be an issue. But
Right.
we've never had tetanus issues, and I've never vaccinated for tetanus, and I really don't want to vaccinate my cattle.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
I wouldn't worry about it with knife castration with tetanus at all. I mean, I wouldn't worry about it. I've never seen that happen or had any experience with that at all. Banding, especially with sheep and goats and things, is more of a risk as they get older, you know.
Because
But and the only reason for that is tetanus is an anaerobic bug. It wants a oxygen-free environment.
Right.
And if you have a little thing you're banding, it's not making as deep of a anaerobic place for guys to live.
It's smaller.
Yeah, that's all. That's the only difference.
Okay.
But
so
no,
is it
I
a
wouldn't
legit
worry about
concern?
it.
Like, say the calves are like 6 months, because we're waiting until we have some hard frost so flies go down, so we don't have any issues with flies.
Yep.
So they could be there. We have a few of the little Black Angus guys that were born earlier in the summer, and we've got one that's a bull. So he'll be about 6 months by the time he's done. At 6 months, would you ever band him without giving a tetanus shot, or would you say
No,
just
I would
cut
just
him?
cut him.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't band anybody that big. I'd cut him. But yeah, and if you're worried about, again, we talked about, what do we use for what?
Yeah.
Use antibiotic herbs in them just as a immune stimulating good thing. Throw them a bunch of calendula, throw them some garlic,
Okay.
and they'll eat it up and think it's great. Getting herbivores to take herbs isn't an issue.
They're eager to.
Yeah, they like herbs. It is a little risky with goats because they'll sometimes chase you for seconds, and you might have a little trouble that way. But otherwise, the cows aren't bad.
Yeah, and we have burdock already.
I see that.
As adornment. So
she's self-medicating with burdock.
She's just a mess.
It must be acupuncture or something. I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, I mean the same plants, same protocols. Wound management's the same. If you have respiratory infections, use antibiotic herbs, use elder on them for antiviral stuff.
Okay.
Use mullein to clear things out and get some mucus moving. It's not that complicated.
Okay.
Don't be scared to do it. There's a few herbs, like I can count them on one hand, that I'd be careful with.
With cattle?
Or
anybody?
No, with a dog or a cat or somebody little.
Okay.
And almost always it's a dosing thing. It's not even that the herb's that toxic. They talk about chocolate being toxic for little dogs.
Yes.
But it's not any more toxic than it is for us. It's just that they only weigh 2 pounds and they eat a half a pound of it.
Okay.
That's a lot of chocolate.
I do like a lot of chocolate myself. So
if we ate that much chocolate, it would be toxic to us too.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
In body ratio.
Yeah, that's mostly what it is with the herbs too. There are some things, I wouldn't use garlic or onions on a dog long term at high doses.
Okay.
It can cause some anemia. I wouldn't use hops on a dog just as one herb, but I'd put it in a formula, because it's dilute enough that it's okay.
That it's fine.
But there's just 3 or 4 or 5 herbs like that. I wouldn't use grape leaves in dogs.
Okay.
Because they're grapes, for some reason, in dogs can be very toxic occasionally for no reason.
Interesting.
And it just melt their kidneys. And
Okay.
And it's not a consistent thing. Like if they eat a grape, it's bad. But I have a client who has a vineyard, and he brought he's had this big old golden retriever, and he brought her in, and she was dying of kidney failure. And I said, she didn't get into the grapes, did she? And he says, she eats grapes all the time. She's been eating grapes all the time since she was a pup. But that day, they were at the right stage of development, or the right good year for grapes, bad year for grapes, concentrations of chemicals and stuff. And it really had a hard time. I fixed it all with herbs. She was fine.
She was okay.
2 days later. But so I wouldn't do grape or grape leaf with dogs.
Okay.
But other than that, I don't do any essential oils with little guys for the same reasons. It's a toxicity thing,
Were you getting a fly, or are you coming at me? Hello, ma'am.
She had a fly.
I said, we're friends, remember? We established that.
She's the apple lady. Be nice.
You ate them all. You got to wait.
But yeah, honestly, it's not that different. Just dose them accordingly. Every formula that I, have on my website, homegrownherbalist.net, I designed them all so you could use them in either one, humans or animals. Or cows or dogs or pigs or chickens,
Okay.
I've had over the years, we've always had chickens and ducks and goats milking and, just this and that. I never had any Highland cows. They're really cute.
They are very cute. I
But
have to say.
we always had stuff, and I just treated them the same way I was treating the kids and everybody else. And so,
Okay. So my next one is worming.
mhm.
Because again, I don't like to use worms in animals that I mean, I don't like to use worms at all. Let me rephrase that. I don't
Yeah.
like to use synthetic.
They're not that great.
Not recommended. I meant to say that synthetic wormers
Well,
in
a Ritz cracker, they're
animals.
not bad.
That came out all kinds of wrong. I don't want to use ivermectin or the pyrethrins, a lot of those on the animals where there's withdrawal periods. And even after that, I'm like, some of that has to stay in the body. And
Sure.
so I don't like to use those. However, even with doing, pasture rotation and stuff, I mean, worms, obviously, you're a vet, but parasite overload can be an issue. So when it comes to the natural wormers, do they actually work? And is there anything about dosing to make sure that they are truly effective?
So they do work. They're not as effective as the drugs
Okay.
for cleaning it out, but they're pretty effective for keeping it at levels that don't matter.
Okay.
Which is what we're after.
Yeah.
And so what I usually do is I've got a formula called Worms, but it's got black walnut, it's got garlic, it's got wormwood in it, but any of those guys or a combination of those guys is really great. And I usually do it for a couple of times a day for 10 days or 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I'll do that 2 or 3 times a year. And it knocks worm loads down enough for the intestinal worms.
Right.
I wouldn't rely on herbal wormers for heartworm in dogs.
Okay.
And I don't know if they have much heartworm up here. They probably don't.
I've never had issue, but
it's spread by mosquitoes.
Okay.
And it lives in your blood, not your gut.
Interesting.
Not yours, but the dogs. And so, it's a completely different mechanism. They're in a different place. A lot of the things that herbs are doing are local things to the worm, and they're not going to get into your circulatory system, mechanically to push things and do things.
Okay.
And the doses you would need and the frequency you would need to protect a dog from heartworm with herbs are probably more dangerous than the drugs.
Okay.
So just use, if you live in a heartworm endemic area, just get the meds.
Go ahead and use them.
It's all right. Yeah.
Okay.
But other than that, they're pretty effective.
Okay. So when you're dosing, like say a herd this size, because of course we have some head boss cows who are going to eat more than their fair share and push the other ones out.
Yep.
I mean, obviously feed enough so that everybody can get some.
Mm-hmm.
But do I really need to be super concerned when I'm doing the whole herd? Like, oh man, that cow might not have gotten a full 2 tablespoons at that dose. I mean,
you need to know they're getting it. One thing you can do is like if you're feeding a pelleted feed or any grain at all, you can mist that with a little water so the herbs stick to it if you're using powdered herbs.
Okay. Yeah, we do alfalfa pellets. I try not to do grain. Occasionally,
sure,
we use some if we really can't get them in somewhere.
The other thing you can do is you can use the actual plants. These guys are plant eaters, and you were standing here giving everybody apples.
Yes.
And you can stand here and give them all the plants too.
Okay.
The other thing you can do is you can drench them. If you made a strong tea, or if you even used the tincture.
Yeah.
If you have the facilities and the way to do that, just squirt it in their mouth, and they got it.
Okay.
That gets a little labor intensive and perilous with girls like this. If you're doing it twice a day for 2 weeks, that's no fun.
Right.
It's easier to just give it into their diet.
Okay.
But they have, almost without exception, especially in animals this big, they have really broad margins of safety.
Okay.
And so as long as everybody's getting what they need, it doesn't matter if Bossy
somebody
got
gets a little
2,
bit more. Okay.
That's
so be
okay.
a little heavy-handed rather than under.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
The other question I have is, when it comes to vaccines and cattle, if you have essentially a closed herd, like everybody's born and raised here, we butcher on site. So it's not, we're not introducing, and we have no signs of we have no disease that we're aware of.
Right.
Is there any that you would say you might want to err on the side of or not?
Well,
or how do you feel about that?
Yeah. So people ask me all the time about vaccines.
Yeah.
Because I'm a vet, but I'm also a fringy herb
right.
guy.
That's what I'm asking you. Yeah.
And so what does he think? I look at it as a risk-benefit analysis. Okay. What's the risk if you don't do it? What's the benefit if you do it?
Right.
And which one's bigger?
Yeah.
And if the benefit outweighs the risk, you do it. Right. In some areas, and it might be the case here, you've got all this beautiful forest land and woods and stuff. If you have elk or deer getting onto your place,
You have an elk herd.
yeah, then your risk of some disease is a little higher.
Okay.
So it's probably worth doing some vaccination. I would probably vaccinate them for leptospirosis if you have wildlife coming onto the property.
Okay.
But if it's truly a closed herd,
yeah.
The risk is pretty low for a lot of those things. You still have to vaccinate them for brucellosis because it's a state law. If you're going to sell them or buy them, or you can raise your own.
Right. Well, that's what we do. I'm like, I don't know. I've never vaccinated for anything.
If you take one to the sale barn.
Oh yes, there is difference when you go. Yeah. Yeah.
And so again, it's just a question of what do you have to do and what do you not have to do. If you're in a environment like this where you have complete control and no coming and going of animals, that's great. For a cow, right? If you have a clean environment, if you have good, hygiene's huge.
Right.
If you have a barn that's clean and has great ventilation, you're going to have way less respiratory disease than if you don't, Yeah. And so that's a big part of it too. But I'm way more pro-vaccine for animals than I am for humans because of the risk-benefit analysis. If we talk about dogs.
We do parvo. Parvo is here.
You give it a parvo shot.
Yeah.
Because dogs all live in a third world country.
Right.
Where their neighbors are pooping on the lawn and they explore everything with their mouth.
Yes.
And so, you better get the shot.
Yeah.
Now, can you manage a dog just with herbs and no vaccines? Absolutely. I have clients doing that because that's what they wanted to do and I teach them how to do it.
Even with parvo?
Yeah. But that dog never leaves their yard.
Okay.
And
we lost a dog to parvo, so I'm hyper
No, exactly. And it'll live in your dirt for 10 years.
Yeah.
But if you have the right environment and the right intent and stuff, you can protect him. I used to work for big poultry operations and big swine operations, big cattle operations and big dairies. And the poultry and swine guys, the diseases are a big deal because they're very confined and,
Right.
And so those facilities are, if I went into the barn, I had to take a shower.
Wow.
It was shower in, shower out, and no animals came into that building, and the feed truck didn't come onto their property. They were on the outside of the fence and put their boom over to fill the silo from the outside. I mean, it was like,
wow, that's biosecurity,
absolute
really...
biosecurity.
Yeah.
And if you do that, well, guess what? You don't have to vaccinate because they have zero exposure.
Okay.
For some things. But for respiratory influenza stuff, maybe you should, because what if a bird flies onto the place? You know what I mean? And so you just have to play it bug by bug and scenario by scenario.
Okay.
I think we do over-vaccinate, especially the dogs. I think we're vastly over-vaccinating. But I would certainly get those puppy shots, get a couple of those, and then do it a year later to make sure he's got good immunity.
Yeah.
And then certainly every couple of years after that, I would. But that's sort of where I'm at with it. The benefits for animals outweigh the risks for them. Contrasted with if I send my kid to school in a class full of little kids that have had their measles shot, what are his odds of getting the measles? Where's he going to get them? And so that changes the dynamic. And I'm not saying you shouldn't vaccinate your kids, but I'm saying you look at each thing,
right?
And make those decisions based on risk and benefit.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So with cattle, I know I keep coming back to cows, but that's where I've got they're my biggest expense. And if I have to replace a cow, it's a lot bigger deal than a chicken, to be honest.
Yeah.
Economical wise. So sometimes, especially here when we have our winters where we're 33 degrees and raining, it's that really cold, just type things. Occasionally, pneumonia can become an issue.
Yeah.
So what would be your herbs for pneumonia treatment with an animal? I'm assuming same if it was a human, but in this instance for cattle.
Well, I'm going to use the same thing. I'm going to use strong antibiotic herbs, calendula, garlic, gumweed, things like that are good antibiotics. I'm going to use immune stimulating herbs. Like echinacea, like elder is antiviral. I'm going to use that one. Really the same things I'm going to use for people.
Use for them too.
Yep.
Okay.
And if you have an incidence of that, again, with your elk population and your deer,
right?
Some of those viruses will hop species, and it's probably a good idea. You know, if you live in a place that has a lot of water, you know, you should probably get the blackleg shot and the red water and some of those other things, you know, just depending on where you live and what your scenario is. But your local vets are going to be the best resource to tell you, you live here, you better do this.
This is what we're seeing.
This is what we're seeing, you know.
Okay.
And they can tell you which ones the pigeons can bring over and which ones the elk are piddling on your pasture with, and, you know.
Yeah.
But as far as risk to you and risk to the animal versus benefit to the animal, it's pretty lopsided in favor of vaccination for some diseases.
Okay.
With cattle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that the elk herd has that I know they have is hoof rot.
Uh-huh.
So obviously, you know, not having them in wet conditions, which right now it's pretty dry, and we don't have ours in barns where they're standing in muck, and it's just, you're going to have it no matter what.
Right.
But we are usually pretty wet here. We vacillate in the winter between freezing and then we're at that cold, you know, so the ground is pretty saturated. Knowing that those herds have hoof rot, I have not seen any in our cows, but would there be anything that you would be herbal wise kind of keeping an eye out for or proactively doing?
Well, I don't know herbal wise. I mean, you could do some immune support stuff, but mostly it's environment.
Hygiene and environment.
Yeah. And I see foot rot vastly less in beef cows than I do in dairy cows.
Okay.
Because they're just out here in a nice clean place.
Right.
You know, in a natural place.
Yeah.
Whereas the dairy cows are up to their ankles in other stuff all day because of just the way their industry works.
Raised
you know?
for the most part. Yeah.
So, yeah. But and if they get hoof rot, yeah, absolutely. There's herbs you can use, you know, calendula would be good, as a poultice or as a tincture. Okay. Foot baths with antibiotic herbs like that would be great. There's stuff you can do, and I would be doing that internally too.
Okay.
You know, immune supporting stuff, antibiotic stuff. But I honestly don't see very much hoof rot in beef cows.
Okay, that's good.
In my career, I haven't
seen that. Okay.
I don't see
well,
it much.
Sounds like,
yeah.
I'm very happy to say that I still have calendula going at home in the garden, and it sounds like the dehydrator needs to be full for a few weeks on end.
That's right.
So I will be harvesting and putting up more calendula than I normally do, in order to meet the herd needs. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
No, you've got beautiful cows and a great environment. This is, you know, a great place to be a cow. So there's free apples.
There's free apples. One last question. Is there any medicinal properties to blackberries?
Blackberries, the berry?
The vine, the root, the leaf.
The whole plant.
Yeah.
And first of all, the only way to control blackberries is with cows and goats. I mean, you knew that, right?
Actually, the pigs are the only thing that will eradicate them for
me. Are they doing it?
The cows will eat them back, but the pigs will actually get the vine, go underground and get the root, because I've got a plethora of them everywhere. Yes. So I'm like, great. If there's some medicinal value, that would be fabulous.
No, there is a good medicinal value.
There is. Yeah. Okay.
So the berry is a great nutritive, obviously.
Yeah. And
in Chinese medicine, the berry is like the ultimate yin tonic. They think it's really good for you, for cooling things down. And anyway,
interesting.
Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
But for all the rest of us, Yeah. But the leaf is medicinal. It's a good astringent.
Okay.
And so what would you do with that? Well, like mostly things you want to dry up.
Right.
So in a cow, scours.
Yeah.
The leaf is great. The root is also good for that. The root bark especially.
Interesting.
Is a really good
for scours.
For scours.
Perfect.
So, if you've got it around, that's a good one.
Okay.
It's a good nutritional source of all kinds of vitamins, but it has a lot of tannins in it. That's the astringency that dries things up. That's mostly what I would use it for.
Okay, great. Well, it's interesting because the Scottish Highlands, they tend to go much more into the brush. So they actually will eat back the blackberry vines, where the Angus and Hereford, I mean, we don't usually let them get that hungry.
Yeah.
So they usually just don't really keep it back at all. So, well, that is fascinating to know on the scours, though. Very handy.
Yep, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
I'll tell you what else is fabulous for scours is angelica seed. Oh. That's an herb everybody ought to have around.
Okay, I don't have that one.
Because there's nothing better for scours than angelica seed.
Really?
So, yeah.
Okay.
And they're pretty. They get like this tall, and they're cute plants.
Oh, perfect. I'll have to put a few.
Yep.
Just far enough out of reach of them, so that they only eat them when I want them to eat them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
I really appreciate that.
You're doing a great job. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, guys, we will have linked beneath the video the full blog post. So if you want to go and have all of this in written format, as well as all of the different links so that you can continue finding out and learning more from Dr. Jones, you will find all of that beneath this video.